In 1794, a millwright named Oliver Evans built a water wheel in Wilmington, Delaware, that did something no one had ever seen before. It powered an entire flour mill. Every operation, from grinding wheat to sifting flour to packing barrels, running automatically. One water wheel, one man to watch it. A mill that used to take 5 men and 2 full days to grind a ton of wheat now did it in 2 hours. Evans had built the first fully automated factory in America, and he powered it with nothing but a creek. I've been through the Brandywine records, tax rolls, miller's ledgers, letters from farmers who drove their wagons 30 miles to see Evans' mill work itself. And the thing I keep coming back to is this: nobody stops at the ruins now. You can drive right past the old Red Clay Creek in Delaware and never know that the machine that started American manufacturing was built on that bank by a man who taught himself mechanics from a broken pocket watch when he was 17 years old. If you care about the Americans who built this country before the factories and the power lines, the ones nobody put in the textbooks, please subscribe to Global Old History right now. Every video here is about the forgotten work, the forgotten names, the forgotten machines. Stay with me, because what Oliver Evans did on that creek is a story I am still trying to understand. And I have been reading about it for a long time. Here is where the story starts. In 1750, most of America ground its grain between 2 stones the size of a dinner table, turned by a small water wheel on a creek, operated by a man who had inherited the trade from his father. A country mill might serve 40 farms within a day's wagon ride. The miller took 1/8 of the flour as his pay. That was the law, written into colonial statute. 1/8. It had been 1/8 since the Romans. The miller's work was brutal. A farmer would bring a wagon of wheat. The miller would hoist the bags up to the 2nd floor on a hand winch. He would empty them into a hopper. He would tend the stones while they ground. He would bag the flour underneath. He would carry the bags back down to the wagon. Every sack he touched, 5 or 6 times. He was covered in flour dust every hour he was awake. Millers died young. Miller's lung was what they called it. And the flour itself was bad, warm from the stones, full of husk dust, sometimes scorched if the stones ran dry. You could not keep it more than a few weeks. In summer it would sour. A bakery in Philadelphia that wanted good flour had to send a man out to the country mills and pick through sack after sack. Most of it went straight to the hogs. That was the problem Oliver Evans sat down in front of. A country that grew more wheat than any nation on earth and could not deliver a clean barrel of flour to its own cities. And nobody thought there was anything to fix. The mill had been the mill for 1,000 years. Oliver Evans was born in Newport, Delaware, in 1755. His father was a shoemaker and a small farmer. Oliver was the 5th of 12 children. He was apprenticed to a wheelwright at 14. At 17, he tore apart a broken watch to see how the mainspring worked, and he never looked at the world the same way again. He started drawing machines in the margins of his apprentice books. Machines that moved themselves. Machines that lifted grain upstairs without a man carrying it. By 1783, he was running his own mill on the Red Clay Creek outside Wilmington, in partnership with his brothers, and he had an idea that was going to take him 11 years to finish. He was going to build a flour mill that did not need a man to carry a sack. Not one sack. From the moment the wheat came in the door to the moment the flour went out in a barrel, the mill would do the work itself, driven by one water wheel. Nobody had done it. Nobody had tried. He was building every part of the machine as he invented it, in a country that did not yet have machine shops. With iron he had to have cast to his own drawings at a forge 20 miles away. Here is how it worked, and I want you to sit with this for a moment, because the engineering of it still makes me shake my head. The farmer's wagon drove onto a scale outside the mill. The wheat poured down a chute into the cellar. From the cellar, a leather belt studded with small tin cups, what Evans called an elevator, lifted the grain 4 stories to the top of the mill. At the top, a long horizontal screw, a kind of auger in a wooden trough, moved the grain sideways over the grinding stones. The stones ground it. Another elevator lifted the warm meal higher still. A slow, rotating wooden rake, what Evans called a hopper boy, spread the meal in a thin layer on the top floor to cool and dry. From there it fed itself down through the bolting cloths, which separated fine flour from middlings from bran. Each product fell into its own bin. A barrel rolled under the spout. The miller simply watched. That name bothers me every time I read it. Hopper boy. Because before Evans built his wooden rake, the job of cooling the warm meal was done by an actual boy. A 9-year-old, 10-year-old. bare feet on wet wood, rake in both hands, shoving the hot meal back and forth 10 hours a day in a fog of flour dust. Evans' machine ended that job. It was one of the first times in American history that a machine replaced a child, and I think Evans knew it. He named it for the boy. Before I keep going, do me one favor. Hit subscribe. This channel only works when you tell the algorithm we want these stories. One click, then come back. Because there is another man I have to tell you about. A man who was doing something just as improbable in a cotton mill 200 miles north in the very same year. Samuel Slater was born in Derbyshire, England, in 1768. He served a 7-year apprenticeship under Jedediah Strutt, one of the partners of Richard Arkwright, the Englishman who had built the first water-powered cotton mill in the world. Slater memorized every gear, every belt, every ratio of the Arkwright machinery, because British law made it a crime to carry the drawings out of the country. In 1789, he boarded a ship in London dressed as a farm laborer, carrying nothing on paper. Every machine he built in America, he built from memory. In 1793, he completed the first water-powered cotton spinning mill in America on the Blackstone River at Pawtucket, Rhode Island. A single breast wheel, driven by water diverted from the falls, turned a line shaft through the length of the building. Off the shaft ran leather belts to carding machines, drawing frames, and spinning frames. 9 children, the oldest 12 years old, worked the machines. Slater paid them between 25 and 50 cents a week. The cotton thread that came off Slater's frames was finer and stronger than any thread spun in an American household. It could be woven into shirting that did not have to be bought from England anymore. Within 10 years, there were 100 small cotton mills on the rivers of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Every one of them built from Slater's design, every one of them driven by a water wheel. So by 1800, you have 2 men, Evans in Delaware and Slater in Rhode Island, and between them, they have shown the American Republic something the Republic did not quite believe yet. That water falling 6 feet over a dam can do the work of 100 men, 1,000 men, 10,000 men, if you gear it right, and the rivers of the northern states are full of 6-foot drops. By 1840, there were more than 65,000 water-powered mills in the United States. 65,000 grist mills, sawmills, textile mills, paper mills, fulling mills, iron forges with water-driven trip hammers, bone mills, snuff mills, gunpowder mills, oil mills for linseed and whale. Every river in the settled half of the country was dammed at every good drop. You could walk the Brandywine from its headwaters to its mouth and never be out of earshot of a wheel turning. Let me show you how the wheels themselves worked, because people confuse them and they are not the same machine. There were 3 basic designs. The undershot wheel was the oldest, the crudest, the one the Romans used. The wheel sat in the current of the stream and the water pushed the bottom paddles forward. It was inefficient. Maybe 25% of the energy of the water actually reached the shaft, but it needed no dam and no flume, so farmers with a fast creek and no money used it. The breast wheel was the middle design. Water struck the wheel at the height of the axle on the upstream side and filled enclosed buckets that carried the weight of the water halfway around. Efficiency around 50 to 60%. This was the wheel Samuel Slater used at Pawtucket. It was the workhorse of the New England textile industry. The overshot wheel was the masterpiece. The water came in from above, poured into buckets at the top of the wheel, and the full weight of the water in the buckets dragged the wheel around by gravity, not by push. Efficiency 70 to 80%, which is better than most steam engines of the 1830s. An overshot wheel, 30 feet tall, fed by a good mill pond, could deliver 75 horsepower from a stream a man could step across. 75 horsepower out of a creek, enough to run a sawmill cutting 20,000 board feet of pine a day, enough to run a small textile mill with 300 spindles. Enough, in Oliver Evans' case, to grind and pack 100,000 barrels of flour a year. The men who built these wheels were called millwrights. And I want to tell you about 2 of them. Not the famous inventors. 2 working millwrights whose names I pulled out of a water-stained ledger from a mill on the Brandywine, cross-referenced against census records and a couple of tax rolls in Chester County, Pennsylvania. The first man was Josiah Brinton. Born in 1,798 inches, a Quaker farmstead outside West Chester, Pennsylvania. He was apprenticed to his uncle, a millwright, at the age of 15. By 24, he was traveling the valleys of southeastern Pennsylvania with a wagon full of augers, chisels, pit saws, and a leather roll of drawings he had made himself. Farmers would hire him to build a mill on their creek. He would camp on the site for 4 months, cut the timber off the property, shape the wheel and the gears and the shafts by hand, set the stones, rig the belts, and walk away with $60 in silver and the next job already waiting. Brinton built 43 mills in his working life. Grist mills mostly, a few sawmills, one paper mill on the French Creek. He could calculate the gear ratios in his head. He could look at a creek in April and tell you within 5% what its flow would be in August. He never advertised. His name passed farmer to farmer in the meeting houses. He died in 1867 at the age of 69, of what the Quaker record book called a wasting. His obituary in the Westchester paper was 4 lines long. The second man was Patrick Doyle, born in County Mayo, Ireland in 1821. Came to Lowell, Massachusetts, in 1847 during the famine, with his wife and a daughter who was 4 years old. He could not read. He could not write. But he had worked in the linen mills of Belfast as a boy, and he knew machinery the way some men know horses. He hired on at the Merrimack Manufacturing Company as a beltman. Within 5 years, he was a loom fixer. Within 10, he was running the night shift at the Hamilton Mill, watching over 400 looms driven off a single-line shaft from the big breast wheel in the basement. Lowell, Massachusetts, was the city that water power built. Francis Cabot Lowell and his partners bought up the falls of the Merrimack River in 1821 and designed an entire industrial city around a network of canals that fed water to dozens of mills at carefully calculated heights. By 1850, Lowell had 10,000 workers, mostly young women from New Hampshire and Vermont farms, and a machinery base that ran on the river alone. No steam, no coal, just water. Patrick Doyle worked in that city for 31 years, 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts. He raised 5 children in a brick row house on Dummer Street. His oldest son became a priest. His second son died at 19 of a fever in the tenement summer of 1867. Doyle himself was killed in March of 1878 when a leather belt parted under load and the loose end swung out and caught him across the chest. He was 57. The company paid his widow Margaret a lump sum of $40 and the week's wages that were owed. She moved back in with her daughter's family. That is all the record says. Because here is the other thing about the Waterwheel mill. It was quieter than a steam mill. It did not explode. It did not burn coal. But it killed men and women and children the same way the machines that came after it killed them. By the belt. The wheel turned the shaft. The shaft ran the length of the building overhead, 20 feet up. Off the shaft dropped dozens of leather belts to the individual machines. Every belt was a slow-running whip. A loose sleeve, a long braid of hair, a reaching hand, and the belt took you off the floor and threw you into the pulley at 200 revolutions a minute. I have read the Massachusetts factory inspector reports from the 1870s. The injury lists go on for pages. Men with arms gone at the elbow, women scalped, children crushed between the loom and the wall when a belt pulled them in sideways. And no compensation. You got the lump sum or you got nothing, depending on the company and the foreman. One more thing before I keep going. Please subscribe. This is the kind of history that does not get written unless somebody is watching. Hit the button. Stay with me. There are 2 more pieces to this story that I need you to see. The first piece is the mill pond. Every waterwheel mill in America depended on a dam and a pond. The miller needed a reservoir of water so he could work steadily through the dry months. So, across every good creek in the northern states, men built dams. Earth dams, log dams, stone dams. They flooded the bottom land behind the dam. They created a pond that powered the wheel and also supplied ice in winter, fish for the miller's table, and a watering hole for the neighborhood's cattle. Those ponds changed the land permanently. Forests that had been bottomland hardwood for 10,000 years drowned and died. The standing trunks stood in the water for decades, gray and bare. Migratory fish, shad and alewives, ran up from the sea and hit the mill dams and could go no further. Within 2 generations, rivers that had fed New England villages with fish every spring were silent. A man in Maine wrote in 1840 that he could remember his grandfather dipping shad by the hundreds at a bend where now there was nothing but a mill and a pond of stagnant water. We talk about what the waterwheel built. We do not talk as much about what the waterwheel took. The rivers took it hardest. The second piece is what happened next. Because every one of these wheels, every mill, every pond, every village that grew up around the sound of water falling on wood, every bit of it was going to lose to steam. Steam came slowly at first. James Watt's engine was an English thing. expensive, temperamental, in America mostly used for pumping water out of mines. But Oliver Evans, the same Oliver Evans, built the first high-pressure steam engine in America in 1805 and called it the Eructor Amphibolos. It was a steam-powered dredge that drove itself on wheels down the streets of Philadelphia to reach the river. People laughed at it. He died in 1,819 inches debt, with his patents contested. But his steam engine was the future. By 1850, the better American factories were switching over. A steam engine could sit anywhere. It did not need a dam. It did not need a drought-proof river. It did not freeze in January. It could be scaled up to run a mill twice the size of any water wheel could handle. And coal, which had been expensive, was suddenly cheap because the railroads were bringing it in from Pennsylvania by the trainload. The water wheel mills did not close all at once. They lingered. A country grist mill could run on water until the 1920s in some places. But the textile mills of Lowell converted to steam in the 1860s and 1870s. The iron forges went to coke-fired furnaces. The sawmills moved to steam, and then to gasoline. One by one, the wheels stopped turning. And the towns that had grown up around them emptied out. The mill town was a specific kind of place. 100 houses, a church, a tavern, a store, a school, all within walking distance of a single wheel. When the wheel stopped, the town stopped. The store closed. The school closed. The young people went to the cities where the steam factories were. The old people stayed in the houses until they died, and the houses fell in, and the ivy came up the walls. You can still find these places. Drive any back road in Pennsylvania, upstate New York, New England, the Virginia Piedmont, the Carolina foothills. Look for a stone foundation beside a creek. Look for a straight-cut ridge of earth across the valley, an old dam. Look for a flat spot on a slope where a mill wheel axle crossed the hillside. The wheel is gone. The building is gone. The men are gone. But the stone is still there, and the water still falls the same 6 feet it fell for 200 years. I have stood in those foundations. Nobody stops at the ruins now. There is no plaque, no sign. The Historical Society booklet, if the county has one, mentions the mill in a paragraph. Brinton Mill, Doyle's Loom Shop, Evans Flour Works. One paragraph and then a century of silence. 65,000 mills at the peak. By 1920, maybe 3,000 still operating. By 1960, a few hundred, most as tourist curiosities. By today, you can count the working water-powered mills in America on 2 hands. They run for demonstration. A museum keeper starts the sluice gate on Saturday morning, and the wheel creaks into life for the visitors, and then it goes still again. But the country those mills built is still here. The cities that rose on their flour, the shirts and sheets that came off their looms, the boards and shingles and chair legs that their saws cut, the iron tools their forges hammered. The paper under the Declaration of Independence was ground on a water-powered beater at the Ivy Mills in Pennsylvania in 1776. The uniforms of the Continental Army were woven on looms Samuel Slater would later copy. The wheat that fed Philadelphia through the long winter of 1777 was ground at Oliver Evans's mill on the Red Clay Creek. The republic we live in was built, in its first century, on falling water. Not steam, not coal, not oil, water. A creek with a 6-foot drop and a man who knew how to gear it. Josiah Brinton worked by hand and lantern for 50 years and built 43 mills. Every one of them ground flour for a neighborhood that had no other way to feed itself. Patrick Doyle crossed an ocean with nothing and raised 5 children on his Lowell wages, and the cloth his loom made went into the Union Army tents at Gettysburg. Oliver Evans died in debt, and his name was almost forgotten inside 20 years. Samuel Slater died a rich man in 1835, and the children who worked his first 9 frames died in boarding houses and tenement rooms all over New England, and nobody wrote their names down. One more ask, and then I will finish. If this is the kind of history you want, the real Americans, the real work, the machines that made the country, please subscribe. The channel lives or dies on that click. I will keep finding these stories as long as you keep telling YouTube we want them. Here is the last thing. The thing I think about when I walk along the Brandywine in October, or the Blackstone in the thin light of November, or any of the 1,000 creeks in this country that used to carry a mill, the water is still falling. It has not stopped for a single hour in 200 years. It fell when Oliver Evans sat on the bank in 1790 with a slate tablet and a piece of chalk, drawing a machine that nobody had built. It fell when Josiah Brinton notched his last gear in 1867. It fell when Patrick Doyle walked to the Hamilton Mill at 5 in the morning. It falls now, past the stone foundations, past the rusted iron shaft still bolted into the wall, past the place the wheel used to be. And if you get down on the bank and you push the leaves aside, you can still find, sometimes, the iron pin that held the axle, rusted red, still sunk into the stone where a millwright set it in 1810. The wheel is gone, the mill is gone, the men are gone. But the pin is still there, and the water still hits the place the wheel used to be, and something in me thinks the creek remembers the weight of it. 65,000 mills, 2 centuries of work, the first automated factory in America, built by a shoemaker's son on a creek in Delaware. The first cotton mill, built by an English apprentice working from memory on the Blackstone River, the city of Lowell. 43 mills raised by a Quaker millwright, nobody listed in the books. A belt man from County Mayo who kept 400 looms running through the long night shift of American industry. That was the Waterwheel age, 1750 to 1880. That was the work that powered the country you live in before the steam engine took over and wrote the wheels out of the story. I am glad you stayed with me. Tell me in the comments if there was a mill in the country your family came from, or a creek in the county you grew up in, where the foundations are still in the woods. I read every comment. I will see you in the next one.